Vivid verses.
The air in the Tribeca penthouse always seemed to thin out at precisely the same time my career-defining moments gained density. It was 11:42 p.m. on the eve of Vance versus Global Dynamics, and the apartment smelled of expensive Joe Malone, velvet rose and oud. A scent Rachel chose because she said it felt like a supportive embrace. Though to me, it always felt like a floral fog designed to mask the sharp metallic tang of my own adrenaline. I sat in the study, my dual monitors casting a cold, blue glow over the mahogany desk, watching the cursor blink like a low-frequency heartbeat. This was the summit. 18 months of discovery, 3 million documents reviewed, and a trial that would either cement my path to senior partnership or bury me under the rubble of a multi-billion-dollar failure. The protocol began with a sound I had learned to dread more than a surprise deposition. The rhythmic, sharp clink of a crystal wine glass against a granite countertop in the kitchen. It was the opening bell of a domestic cage match. Rachel didn't knock as she entered the study. She didn't have to. In her mind, my study was merely an annex of her emotional jurisdiction. She was dressed in a silk slip dress that caught the blue monitor light, her hair artfully disheveled in a way that signaled she had been struggling while I had been ignoring her. She stood by the door, framed by the shadows of the hallway, a carefully curated image of a woman on the verge of a breakdown. I saw the name again, Quentin, she said. Her voice was thin, a reedy vibration that cut through the silence. In your archived messages, Elena, from a 2021 retreat, I felt the familiar tightening in my solar plexus. Not the guilt she was fishing for, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. This was the first rule of the protocol. The past is a living document. In Rachel's world, time was not a linear progression of events. It was a reservoir she could reach into at any moment to pull out a handful of silt to cloud the waters of the present. That was 3 years ago, Rachel, I said, keeping my voice at the flat, professional register I use for cross-examining hostile witnesses. I didn't look up from Dr. Eris Thorne's deposition. I needed to find the exact inflection point where his theory of independent discovery collapsed into documented theft. Elena is a senior paralegal in the London office. We haven't spoken since the Bristol merger was finalized. The archive thread is business correspondence. It's been dormant for 36 months. But you didn't delete it, she countered, stepping into the pool of light cast by my desk lamp. You keep it there like a backup plan, like a little window you can open if I ever become too much for you. Do you have any idea what it's like to be the anchor for a man who treats his home like a hotel lobby? I spend my life making sure this place is a sanctuary for you, and you can't even afford me the basic courtesy of deleting a woman who clearly meant something to you. This was Rule 2, the burden of the anchor. Over our 5 years together, Rachel had constructed a narrative of radical support that was, in reality, a system of emotional containment. She claimed to be the one who kept me tethered to my humanity, the one who bore the emotional labor of my high-stress career. But the support was a closed loop. It was a success tax she levied on every milestone. I realized, looking back at the math of our history, that she didn't want a partner who succeeded. She wanted a partner who was perpetually in debt to her for his success. I have the opening statement of my life in 9 hours, I said, finally closing the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was like a gavel. I need 4 hours of REM sleep. That is the objective reality of the situation. Why are we doing this now, Rachel? Why is 2021 suddenly the priority at midnight before the Vance trial? Because you're doing the wall, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears that were perfectly timed to the climax of her grievance. The stoic Quentin, the cold, logical litigator who can shut off his heart to win a point. I'm standing here telling you that I feel erased and you're worried about a deposition? If I matter at all, you'll stay here and help me understand why you keep secrets. If you can't be present for me now, when I'm actually hurting, then what is all of this for? The money? The partnership? I don't care about the firm, Quentin. I care about us. She moved toward the coffee table where my trial binders, 3-inch thick monoliths of evidence, were arranged in alphabetical order. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the spine of exhibit as if she might tip it over. It was a territorial gesture, a reminder that she could disrupt the liturgy of my preparation whenever she felt her relevance waning. I watched her hand. It was steady. She wasn't having a crisis. She was performing one. I realized in that moment that she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the threat of my autonomy. For years, I had been a supporting character in her drama of insecurity, a role I had accepted because I mistook her volatility for passion and her sabotage for a need to be loved. I had been the anchor she used to weigh down the ship, convinced that the drag was what kept us from drifting away. But as I looked at her, at the polished chrome of her jewelry and the calculated tilt of her head, I saw a system that had become parasitic. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a hostage who would apologize for having a future she couldn't control. The rules have changed, Rachel, I said. I stood up, but I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer the embrace that usually served as the white flag in these midnight skirmishes. I picked up my pillow and my secondary briefcase. Where are you going? Her voice sharpened, the vulnerability flaking away to reveal the cold anger beneath. The guest room, I said. I'm locking the door. I am putting in earplugs. If you scream, I won't hear you. If you break something, I'll pay for it in the morning. This is not a discussion. This is a containment strategy. Quentin, if you walk away from me tonight, we are finished. Do you hear me? You're choosing a job over your life. If you lock that door, don't expect me to be here when you come back. I walked past her, the scent of her perfume suddenly cloying and suffocating, like the smell of a funeral home. I entered the guest room, a sterile, white-walled space we kept for visiting partners, and turned the deadbolt. The click was the most satisfying sound of the fiscal year. I lay down in the dark, the silence ringing in my ears, and for the first time in months, I felt my heart rate begin to drop into a steady, productive rhythm. I didn't think about Elena. I didn't think about the tears. I thought about the 3 specific perjury triggers I had set for the Global Dynamics CFO. I fell asleep in minutes. The Federal Court of the Southern District of New York is a cathedral of brushed steel, polished wood, and historical gravity. By 8:30 a.m., the air in the courtroom felt pressurized, but I felt as though I were in a vacuum. The mental fog that usually accompanied the morning of a trial, the Rachel-induced haze of fatigue and guilt, was absent. My mind felt like a blade that had been stropped to a microscopic edge. The spatial symbolism of the courtroom was clear. I was in the inner circle. To my left, the defense team, a phalanx of 6 lawyers in charcoal suits, were whispering frantically. Behind me, the gallery was a sea of journalists and curious law students. Usually, Rachel was there in the 3rd row, center aisle, the power seat. She would wear something vibrant, a red blazer or a cobalt dress, to ensure she was my visual North Star. She wanted to be the first thing I saw when I turned to consult with my team, a silent director making sure I was still looking for her approval. She called it anchoring my spirit, but it was really just a way of ensuring I remained a supporting character in her observation. Today, the 3rd row was occupied by 3 anonymous interns from the defense's firm. Rachel was punishing me with her absence, a ghosting designed to make me feel unmoored. Instead, I felt a strange, terrifying expansiveness. Without her in the room, the periphery became just that, background noise. My world contracted to the 4 feet of mahogany in front of me and the 12 people in the jury box. Beside me sat Sarah, my senior associate. Sarah was the successor, not to Rachel's place in my bed, but to the role of the essential other. She was 32, possessed a mind like a high-frequency trading algorithm, and had zero interest in my emotional state. She didn't greet me with a hug or a question about how I slept. She simply tapped a stylus against her tablet, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. The defense tried to sneak in a late motion to suppress the Thorn emails at 6 a.m., she said, her voice a low, steady drone. I've already drafted the rebuttal and filed it. We're good to go. Also, I noticed a discrepancy in their experts' travel logs. I've flagged it for the cross. You're on in 5. I straightened my tie, feeling the crispness of the silk. Thank you, Sarah. You look different today, she noted, her eyes flicking to mine for a fraction of a second. Usually, the morning of an opener, you look like you've been through a meat grinder. Did you find a new meditation app? I optimized my sleep environment, I replied. The trial was a masterpiece of clinical destruction. As I stood to deliver the opening statement, I felt a physical shift in my own body. For years, I had been leaning back, braced against the anchor of Rachel's insecurity. Now I was leaning forward. I was the sail. I moved through the evidence with a fluidity that felt like flying. When I needed a document, Sarah had it ready before I reached the end of my sentence. Our connection was one of shared, specialized tools and silent, professional codes. We were two parts of a single, functioning machine operating at peak billable efficiency. There was no success tax here. There was only the objective pursuit of the win. At the mid-morning break, I walked to the back of the courtroom to get a drink of water. I looked at the power seat. It was still empty. In the past, this would have triggered a panic response. I would have checked my phone, sent a frantic text, tried to manage the crisis from the hallway to ensure she wouldn't do something drastic like leave or hurt herself. I would have spent my recess apologizing for being a lawyer. But as I stood there, watching the sunlight glint off the polished brass rails, I realized that the space where she should have been wasn't a hole. It was an opening. I was no longer a participant in her drama. I was an observer of my own life. My phone remained in my locker, but I could feel it vibrating in the back of my mind. When I finally retrieved it after the judge adjourned for the day, the screen was a vertical timeline of desperate optics. As I scrolled through the logs, I could see the protocol moving from annoyance to self-preservation. 9:15 a.m. Rachel, I hope you're happy. I spent the night at the Mercer. I couldn't breathe in that apartment. You've turned our home into a tomb. I'm sure you're having a great morning while I'm figuring out where to live. 10:45 a.m. Rachel, I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm not joking, Quentin. My chest is tight. I'm going to the ER. But I guess you're too busy being the great litigator to care about your wife's life. I'm calling my mother. 12:30 p.m. Rachel, I'm back. The doctor said it's extreme, stress-induced angina. He asked if anything changed at home. I didn't know what to tell him. Should I tell him you locked me out of the room while I was crying? Should I tell him you don't care if I live or die? 1:45 p.m. Rachel, I saw the news alerts. Miller crushes Global Dynamics. Congratulations. I hope the money is enough to keep you warm at night, because I'm moving my things out. You won the case and lost your soul. 3:20 p.m. Rachel, are you really not going to answer? This is cruel, Quentin. This is emotional abuse. You're ghosting your own life. Please call me. I'm worried about us. I didn't mean what I said about the Mercer. I just want us back. The shift was textbook. Panic, followed by threats of departure, followed by the health crisis, followed by the moral indictment, and finally, the pivot to feigned concern. She was prioritizing optics over connection, trying to find a frequency that would force me to respond. I didn't reply. I sat in the back of a black car, the city lights blurring past the window like a digital interface, and felt a profound sense of finished. I had ghosted the relationship long before I stopped replying to the texts. I had stopped participating in the success tax the moment I turned that deadbolt in the guest room. The clarity of the trial had bled into the clarity of my existence. I wasn't angry. I was simply done with the maintenance of a system that offered no return on investment. The apartment was too bright when I returned. Rachel had turned on every designer lamp, every recessed LED, every sconce, a tactic she used to make the space feel exposed and unforgiving. She was standing in the kitchen, a glass of red wine in her hand, the bottle sitting open on the granite island like a spent shell casing. She had changed into a soft, cashmere sweater, the reconciliation outfit. "You're late," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic. "I was starting to think you were staying at the office to celebrate without me. I heard about the verdict. Everyone is talking about it." "We won," I said, dropping my keys on the granite island. The sound was sharp, clinical. I didn't put down my briefcase. I stood in the center of the living room, a space that suddenly felt like a gallery I was merely visiting. I looked at the surfaces, the polished chrome fixtures, the stiff linen curtains, the cold tea sitting in a porcelain cup on the side table. It all looked like stage props. "I knew you would," she said, stepping toward me. She reached out to touch my lapel, her fingers lingering on the wool. "I'm sorry about last night, Quentin. I was just so scared. I felt you drifting away into that case, and I panicked. I know I shouldn't have brought up Elena. It was silly. If we're going to move forward, we need to set some boundaries about how you handle your stress versus my needs. I've already looked up a new therapist, someone who specializes in high-intensity careers. There is no moving forward, Rachel. There's only the audit." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a list I had compiled on the ride up. I had spent the last hour quantifying the erosion of my autonomy. "The math of us is no longer sustainable," I said. "Let's look at the objective data points of the last 24 months. Point 1, March 14th, the night before the Peterson merger. You had a suspicious mole that required me to stay up until 4 a.m. researching oncology. The mole was a freckle. Lost productivity, 6 hours. Point 2, June 2nd, the partner review. You accidentally deleted my presentation while cleaning my desk because you felt neglected by my late hours. Point 3, November 12th, the night of the firm's charity gala. You staged a fight about my mother because I was talking to the managing partner for too long. Point 4, last night, you resurrected a 3-year-old archived message to ensure I wouldn't sleep before the biggest trial of my career. The success tax you levy on this relationship has become a liability I can no longer afford to pay. You aren't an anchor, Rachel. You are a drag coefficient. You're keeping a tally?" she asked, her voice rising, the cashmere sweater no longer hiding the tension in her shoulders. "That's sociopathic, Quentin. Relationships aren't spreadsheets. I'm the only one who reminds you that you're a human being, not just a machine for Vance and the partners. I'm the one who anchors you to reality." "No," I corrected, my voice dropping to a final, cold register. "You're the only one who tries to make being a human being feel like a weakness. You don't want a partner. You want a system of dependency. You need me to be slightly broken so that you can feel like the one who fixed me. You manufacture crises to ensure that I never feel strong enough to realize I don't need you to manage my emotions. But I'm not broken, Rachel. I'm just optimized, and you're a net loss entity. You are a liability to my future, not an asset. I gave you 5 years," she snapped, throwing the wine glass. It didn't hit me. She was too controlled for that, but it shattered against the granite island, the Sancerre pooling like a pale, expensive wound. "I was here when you were just an associate. I supported you through every late night." "You didn't support me," I said. "You taxed me. You extracted an emotional payment for every hour I spent away from you. You made my success a grievance, and I'm done paying." The silence that followed was clinical. I looked at her and realized I felt no desire to fix the glass, no desire to soothe her anger, no desire to explain myself further. The erosion was complete. The cliff had finally fallen into the sea. I had spent years thinking I needed her volatility to keep me sharp, a whetstone for my patience. I was wrong. I didn't need a whetstone. I needed a horizon. "I'll go to therapy," she blurted out. The failed repair offered in the face of absolute collapse. "I'll call Dr. Ayers tomorrow. I'll go twice a week. We can do the attachment workshops. I'll even apologize to Elena. Just don't do this. Not like this. We're a team, Quentin. Everyone thinks we're the perfect couple. The bandwidth is gone, Rachel. I've reallocated it to things that actually grow. You're worried about what everyone thinks? That's the problem. You're worried about the optics of a partnership, but you've been sabotaging the reality of it for years." The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a victory announcement from the firm's internal server, mirrored on the public PR wire. Quentin Miller secures $400 million settlement. Exceptional performance under pressure. I looked at Rachel. She was staring at the phone, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The belief that this superficial promotion would save our system. She reached out a hand, waiting for me to take it, to accept the bribe of a restorative vacation that would inevitably become another theater for her insecurity. "I'm not going to be here when you get back from your mother's house tonight," I said. "I've already contacted a moving service for a priority pack-out for the guest room and the study. Consider the penthouse your severance package. I've already instructed my accountant to transfer the title to your name. It's a clean break. No litigation, no fighting over the assets. I just want the silence." "You're buying me off?" she whispered, horrified. "I'm balancing the books," I replied. I walked to the door. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the heat of a fight. I felt the strange, peaceful weightlessness of a man who has finally cut the anchor. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors began to slide shut. Rachel stood in the hallway, her face finally losing its curation, revealing a person who was simply small. She realized that the greater good of my career, which she had so often used as a weapon to guilt me, had finally become the very thing that made her irrelevant. The system had optimized. She was the redundant department. The elevator descended in a smooth, silent motion. I watched the floor numbers count down, 12, 11, 10. With every floor, the pressure in my chest eased. The peaceful ending wasn't a celebration. It was just a return to baseline. I walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The city was a grid of light and logic, a vast machine operating without the need for apology. I sat at a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, staring at a cup of black coffee. The surface was hard and reflective. The interface was simple. I pulled out my tablet and began to review the schedule for tomorrow. 7 a.m., settlement signing. 9 a.m., press conference. 11 a.m., strategy session with Sarah regarding the next phase of the Vance litigation. I was no longer anchoring a system of sabotage. I was the ship, and the wind was finally in my back. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, looked at my reflection in the dark window of the diner, and for the first time in 5 years, I recognized the man looking back at me. He was efficient, he was authentic, and he was finally perfectly free of attacks. I opened a new document and began to type. It wasn't a legal brief, it was a plan, and for the first time, I didn't have to ask for permission to finish it.
Thanks for listening.